So I want to start with a question today. Why doesn't Sinai happen right away? Our ancestors raced out of Egypt during the night. They rushed to the water's edge. They crossed through Yam Suf and emerge unscathed on the other side. Why don't they get up the next morning and receive the Ten Commandments? Or maybe they need a few days of rest. But one would think that they could be ready to go fairly quickly. Emily Selman and Rav Tyler just had a baby. She's adorable, by the way. I met her yesterday. And her naming will be a week from tomorrow. Baby boys are named by tradition at a bris on day 8. It's not simple, but totally manageable to put together a major event not long after another major event. But there are a full 49 days between the Exodus and Mount Sinai, between liberation and law. And you might ask, or you might suggest, maybe they just needed more commute time. Sinai is a 7-week journey, but our tradition makes clear that Har Sinai is actually not such an important mountain. The Midrash insists on its unimportance, actually, its diminutive stature. And the Torah gives no indication that the people would even remember where it was located. That's why there's no Jewish shrine there. No one knows where it was. Why not just pick some other random mountain closer to the coast? So here's what I want to suggest. The answer to this question, why doesn't Sinai happen right away, is similar to another question we often ask, and for which we have already answered. Why do we need 40 years of wandering before reaching the promised land? Why? Because we weren't ready. We needed time to shake off the experience of slavery, to find our footing, to become a people. The time between Egypt and Sinai, those 49 days of arrival, are captured in Parashat Emor, in this week's Parsha. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, God spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I'm giving you and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He shall elevate the sheaf before God for acceptance on your behalf. The priest shall elevate it on the day after Shabbat. Usfartem lachem mimocharata Shabbat miyom iviachem et omer hatznufa Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot Tiena. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete, and you must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to God. What's being described here? This is Sfirat HaOmer, the methodical counting of 1 sheaf of barley each day to mark the time between Pesach and Shavuot. But if you're paying attention, this timeline isn't entirely clear in the text. The passage from our Parsha mentions Shabbat as the starting point, but no specific mention of Pesach. Some guidance can be found within the pages of our Chumash. You may have read that 1 week ago, we lost one of the seminal authors of our time, Rabbi Harold Kushner. Rabbi Kushner was also a colleague who served a conservative pulpit in Natick, Massachusetts, and he was doing so when he wrote his seminal work, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. What you may not know is that Rabbi Kushner also edited the quote-unquote drash commentary in our Eitz Chaim Chumash. And that's the one that's below the line on the page. Here's what Rabbi Kushner, Zichrono Livracha, writes on our section of the Torah. The sages held that the Sabbath here refers to the Pesach festival. Explaining that interpretation, a Ramah, that's Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe, the author of Akedat Yitzchak, writes, if the Omer were tied to Shabbat, symbol of the creation of the world, then the wheat harvest would have been purely a natural phenomenon. Connecting it to the Exodus teaches us to see it like the Exodus as an instance of God's benevolence. Krishna continues, "It is through God's favor, not through our clever manipulation of nature, that the earth yields food for us to eat. That is why we cannot properly enjoy it until we have thanked God for it." In other words, counting the Omer from Passover to Shavuot is a way of recognizing our own limitations. Not that we have no power in the world, but placing our power, our influence, into a greater context. That is the vicissitudes of nature, but also the possibilities of holiness in the world. It is this tension, the complicated relationship between divine caring and the reality that, as Krishna explores in his famous book, the world is unfair and suffering widespread. It's that tension that undergirds this period of the Sphira. And that's almost certainly why Sfirat HaOmer is seen by the rabbis as a period of semi-mourning. We hope and pray that the rain will fall, that the harvest will be bountiful, that we'll be able to dedicate our bikurim, our first fruits, on Shavuot. But who knows, really? Maybe it won't rain enough. Maybe it will rain too much and wash out the crops. But Chazal, our ancient sages of blessed memory, add another layer to the story of the Omer. And I think this points to my question as to why our ancestors had to wait those full 7 weeks between Mitzrayim and Har Sinai. In the Talmud, in Masechet Yevamot, that is a 5th, 6th century text, a compilation of Jewish law and lore, we're told Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students in an area of land that stretched from Givat to Antipatris. Vechulan metu beperek echad, and they all died in one period of time, and it explains because they did not treat each other with respect. And when did they die? What was that period? Tana kulam metu bepesach mi pesach vi'ad atzeret. They died between Passover and Shavuos. We don't know much about the plague that killed 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. There's pretty good evidence that this tale is a conflation of 2 stories from elsewhere in rabbinic tradition, so perhaps this never really happened. But, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And the story we tell during the Omer is that unkindness can be dangerous. Pharaoh was more than unkind, of course. He enslaved our people for hundreds of years. That sort of oppression was imposed upon us. But we Jews also know well what it is to oppress one another, to disregard our essential humanity. This can be more subtle than the tyranny of authoritarian rulership. What is Sfirat HaOmer? It's a roadmap to Jewish independence, to treating one another not as victims or, God forbid, adversaries, but as comrades, as sisters and brothers, as siblings. Of course, the story of Rabbi Akiva's students happens not in 1200 BCE as we are wandering through the Sinai desert, but in the 130s CE, when the Romans are bearing down, outlawing Torah study and insisting on Roman hegemony. In other words, the story of the Sphira for us isn't only the story of Egypt and Sinai, it's also the story of what it takes in every generation to inherit Torah. Are we brave enough to fight for it? Are we worthy to receive the mitzvot, the sacred obligations of our people? How do we prepare ourselves? One way is to remember this 2nd century cautionary tale and take heed of the Gemara's instructions elsewhere. Kol Yisrael aravim ze bazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. But this coming week isn't just any week of the Omer, is it? And one final way our tradition guides us toward greater compassion, greater menschlichkeit, is through one day on that 49-day cycle. Today is day 30 of the Omer, which means that in 3 days, that's Monday night and Tuesday, is day 33, otherwise called Lag BaOmer. What is Lag BaOmer? One reason we mark this day is tied to the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of Rabbi Akiva's new students after the plague. It says back in the Talmud, in Yevamot, Vaya olam shamem, ad sheba Rabbi Akiva etzel rabotenu shebedarom usna'a lahem. And the world was desolate of Torah until Rabbi Akiva came to our rabbis in the south and taught his Torah to them. And who were they? Who were these rabbis, these new students who became Rabbanim? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. That is to say, Lag BaOmer is special because it celebrates a way forward, the resuscitation of Torah learning in a world of oppression and loss. But another reason Lag BaOmer is important is that this day marks a pause in that terrible plague I described. And contrary to what we might think, Lag BaOmer isn't a day of recovery. It's a day of celebration. We make bonfires, and weddings are often celebrated. The ultimate message of Lag BaOmer, whether for those dancing at Rashbi's grave on Har Meron, or just enjoying a barbecue or a concert with friends, is that joy is an essential component to survival. To be Jewish isn't, as the old joke goes, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. To be Jewish is to dance and sing and express our gratitude to heaven. Lag BaOmer is a respite from the weight of Jewish existence, a reminder that we can and should be so much more than liberated slaves. Why doesn't Sinai happen right away? For exactly the same reason we don't enter the promised land for 40 years. Because we needed to get ready, to prepare the soil, to allow the rain to fall and the seeds to germinate. And as we learn from Lag BaOmer, to celebrate all that's possible in this world. By the time we get to Shavuot, it's not an afterthought of the Exodus, it's the gateway to a new way of being. This year, Shavuot occurs the evening of May 25th and the daytime of May 26th and 27th. And on those days, we will stand and receive Torah once more. And in so doing, we will prepare ourselves for the inevitable journey through the wilderness, hoping one day to be worthy of the promised land. Shabbat Shalom.